August 6th, 1945, 9 p.m. 10 of Germany's top nuclear scientists are captured, safe in an English manor house. They are arrogant, brilliant, and completely convinced the Allies are years away from building an atomic bomb. Then, the 9 o'clock news begins, and their world of supposed superiority evaporates in an instant. June 4th, 1942, Harnack House, Berlin. The air in the grand conference room is thick with the competing aromas of old varnish, stale cigar smoke, and the faint, sharp scent of ozone from the electrical equipment down the hall. Sunlight struggles through the tall, leaded glass windows, illuminating motes of dust that dance over the polished oak table. Seated at the head is a man who is not a scientist. He is Albert Speer, Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production. His uniform is immaculate, his face a mask of calculated, impatient efficiency. He represents the total power of the Nazi war machine, a machine that devours steel, concrete, and lives at an unprecedented rate. He is here for one reason: to decide if nuclear physics is a weapon or a waste of time. Flanking the table are the brightest minds in German science. Werner Heisenberg, the Nobel laureate, the boy wonder of quantum mechanics. His eyes are bright, analytical. He carries an air of academic confidence that seems almost detached from the desperate war raging beyond these walls. Beside him sits Otto Hahn, the dignified elder statesman, the man who discovered nuclear fission. There is also Paul Hartek, Kurt Diebner, and others from the Uranverein, the Uranium Club. For 2 years, they have been toying with the concept of a Uran machine, a uranium machine, a reactor. Speer leans forward, tapping a silver cigarette case on the table. "Gentlemen," his voice is smooth, but cuts through the room. "The Führer is aware of your work, but the demands of the Eastern Front are total. I have been tasked with diverting all resources to weapons that can deliver a decisive victory. Not in 5 years. Now." He looks directly at Heisenberg. "Professor, you have requested more funding, more materials. For what, precisely? A bomb?" Heisenberg adjusts his spectacles. He is a theorist, not an armaments manufacturer. He finds the entire discussion crude. "Herr Minister." Heisenberg begins, his tone more like a university lecturer than a man pitching a war-winning weapon. "The science is clear. If we can sustain a chain reaction in a pile of uranium and a moderator, we will create 2 things. First, an engine, a reactor, that can produce nearly limitless energy. This could power submarines, battleships, perhaps even factories, freeing up our oil." Speer makes a small, impatient gesture. "Engines. He needs bombs. And the second outcome?" Speer presses. "The second," Heisenberg continues, "is a byproduct. In the reactor, the uranium-238 will transmute. It will become a new element. Element 94. Plutonium. This new element, Herr Minister, would almost certainly be an explosive of unimaginable power." A silence settles. Hahn shifts in his chair, visibly new, uncomfortable with the turn. He is a chemist who stumbled upon a terrible power. He has nightmares of a world consumed by his discovery. Speer's eyes narrow. "How much? How much plutonium would you need for a device?" Heisenberg hesitates. This is the theoretical precipice. His calculations, the ones he and his colleagues have debated, suggest a critical mass not in kilograms, but in tons. A massive, impossibly heavy sphere of this new metal. "It is difficult to say with certainty," Heisenberg says, "but perhaps a mass similar to a small reactor itself. 10, perhaps 20 tons. It is formidable." Speer leans back, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. He almost smiles. Tons. To him, this isn't a weapon. It's a fantasy. He thinks of the 88mm anti-aircraft guns rolling off the assembly lines, the thousands of Panzer IVs needed for the summer offensive. He cannot divert the resources of the Reich to build a 20-ton bomb that might work. Hartek, the physical chemist, interjects. "There is another path, Herr Minister, uranium-235, the rare isotope. If we can separate it from the common uranium..." The American method, another scientist scoffs quietly, referring to the brute force techniques of isotope separation. How much of this? 235. Speer asks, his interest flagging. Perhaps only kilograms, Heisenberg admits. 50, maybe 100. But the industrial cost, Herr Minister, to separate this U-235, you would need to build factories, acres in size, use processes that consume more electricity than all of Berlin. It is technically possible, but it is not elegant. It is not physics. It is brute, American-style engineering. We believe the reactor path is the only practical one. This is the moment, the critical, fatal decision. Speer looks at these brilliant men. They are talking about reactors, engines, and theoretical explosives that weigh as much as a bunker. They aren't talking about a deliverable weapon. They are, he concludes, just scientists. Professor Heisenberg, Speer says, standing up and closing his notebook. The resources you ask for the heavy water from Norway, the processed uranium you shall have them. For your reactor, continue your research. Perhaps it will power the U-boats of 1944. But do not expect the Reich to divert its entire industrial might to this theory. He leaves the room. Heisenberg and his colleagues are relieved. Their funding is secure. They can continue their elegant work, their pure physics. They are the smartest men in the world. On the only viable path to nuclear power, they are completely, utterly wrong. They have just told the most powerful man in the war economy that the atomic bomb is a distant dream. And across the Atlantic, in Chicago, in Tennessee, and in the deserts of New Mexico, the crude American method, the one the Germans just mocked as impossibly inefficient, is already being built. August 6th, 1945. 9 p.m. Farm Hall, Godmanchester, England. The evening is quiet. A late summer drizzle whispers against the blackout curtains of the drawing room. This is not a prison camp. It is a sprawling, comfortable, ivy-covered manor house. For the men inside, it is a gilded cage. 10 of Germany's top nuclear scientists, the core of the Uranverein, are here. They were captured by the Allied Also's mission as the Reich collapsed, swept up from their labs in Hechingen and Haigerloch just weeks before the end. Werner Heisenberg is here. Otto Hahn, Kurt Diebner, Walther Gerlach, Paul Hartek. They have spent the last 3 months in limbo, cut off from the world. They read physics papers, they play fistball on the lawn, they debate scientific theory, and they listen, always, for the hidden microphones they assume are everywhere. They are, in a word, bored, and they are still arrogant. Their conversations circle endlessly around one topic: why their reactor, their elegant Uran machine, failed to go critical. They blame the war, the lack of heavy water, the Allied bombing, the incompetence of party officials. They never, ever blame their physics. They are still convinced their reactor path was the only one. They are certain the Americans, if they were working on a bomb at all, were fumbling in the dark. Heisenberg, in particular, is confident. He has told the others, it would take the Americans and British at least until 1948 to build a functioning reactor, let alone a bomb. They simply do not have the theoretical framework. Tonight, they are gathered around the crackling wireless set in the drawing room, listening to the 9 o'clock BBC news broadcast. A log snaps in the fireplace. Hahn is half dozing in an armchair. Heisenberg is idly scanning a copy of Nature. The announcer's voice, crisp and formal, cuts through the static. Here is a summary of the main news. President Truman has announced a new and terrible weapon. An atomic bomb has been dropped by an American aircraft on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The city, a major military base, has been obliterated. The room goes utterly silent. The only sound is the rain and the voice from the radio. Heisenberg's head snaps up, his expression one of pure academic irritation. Nonsense, he says, not to anyone in particular. Propaganda. Walther Gerlach, a physicist who had been the Reich plenipotentiary for nuclear physics, looks pale. A single bomb? Obliterated? God in heaven, what does that mean? It is a bluff? Kurt Diebner, Heisenberg's rival, states flatly. They have perhaps taken 10,000 tons of RDX and packaged it. Atomic is a word they are using to scare the Japanese. It is not possible. But Otto Hahn is not listening. He is white as a sheet. He stumbles to his feet and walks to the small bar in the corner, his hands shaking so badly he can barely pour a glass of water. He, more than any of them, understands the potential. He is the man who split the atom. He is the man who, in 1938, wrote in his lab notebook that the implications were sobering. No. Hahn whispers, clutching the glass. No, no, no. If this is true, I am responsible. It is all my work. He begins to weep, a deep, shuddering terror. The other scientists rush to him, patting his shoulder. Calm yourself, Otto. It's not true. It's a political trick. But the BBC announcer is continuing, reading a technical statement released by the White House. He is using words like fission, uranium, and a force from which the sun draws its power. This is not simple propaganda. Heisenberg stands now, pacing the floor. He is not horrified. He is insulted. His mind is racing, not with the moral implications, but with the physics. They cannot have done it, he insists, his voice rising. It is not possible. They would need to separate the isotopes. We proved how difficult that would be. The brute force method, the cyclotrons, the factories, it's industrially absurd. But Werner, Paul Hartek says quietly, what if it wasn't absurd? What if they simply did it? What if they built the factories you said were too big? What if they employed 60,000 people and spent billions? Heisenberg stops pacing. He looks at Hartek as if he's just suggested the moon is made of green cheese. It is a trick, Heisenberg says, his voice cold and final. There is no other explanation. I am a physicist. I know what is possible, and I will not believe a word of it until I see proof. They have a new explosive, perhaps, but an atomic bomb? No. The room is divided. On one side, the profound, soul-deep horror of Otto Hahn, who fears it is all true. On the other, the profound intellectual arrogance of Werner Heisenberg, who insists it is utterly impossible. The British officer guarding them, Major T.H. Rittner, quietly closes the door. He knows the secret microphones hidden in the light fixtures and the fireplace are capturing every word. This is the moment they have been waiting for. The moment the masters of German science realize they are, in fact, second-rate. Hahn is in his room, on the verge of a breakdown, the other scientists having to talk him out of suicide. And Heisenberg is still angry. It's a lie. It has to be. August 6th, 1945, 11:30 p.m. Farm Hall, Godmanchester, England. The house is restless. The initial shock has fractured, splintering into a dozen different, frantic conversations. Denial has evaporated, leaving a raw, exposed nerve of humiliation. Otto Hahn has been put to bed, heavily sedated, after a night of profound despair, moaning that the blood of hundreds of thousands is on his hands. The other scientists, however, are now wide awake, their minds buzzing with an intensity they haven't felt in months. They are no longer concerned with the morality. They are consumed by the how. How did the Americans, whom they considered so scientifically inferior, so artless in their approach, do it? Werner Heisenberg is in the center of the drawing room. He is no longer the detached, confident theorist. He is a man possessed. His jacket is off, his tie is pulled loose, and his eyes are burning. It's not possible. It's not possible. He's been muttering, but the words have changed meaning. It's no longer, it is physically impossible. It's now, how is it possible they did it, and we did not? He grabs a piece of chalk from a billiards table and strides to a large blackboard used for their lectures. There is a mistake, he says, to the room. The news, it must be wrong about the details. Let us re-examine the fundamentals. The others gather around. Paul Hartek, Kurt Diebner, Walther Gerlach. This is a who's who of German physics, and they are about to watch their leader unravel. The core of the problem, Heisenberg begins, his voice shaky, chalk flying across the board, is the mean free path of a fast neutron. To create a chain reaction, the neutron must strike another nucleus before it escapes the mass. He scribbles equations, lambda for mean free path, sigma for fission cross-section. He is in his element, the university lecturer, but his audience is grim-faced. Now, he says, to achieve this in a sphere of U, 235, the radius r must be. So, and the mass, therefore, m equals 43 pi r cubed rho, and you see, he turns, a wild look in his eyes. He taps the final calculation. It is what I have always said. To make it work, the mass must be enormous. It is tons. It must be tons. The industrial separation for tons of U 235? It is. A silence hangs in the room. The men are staring at the board. They are all brilliant, and they all see it. It's Karl Wirtz who speaks first, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Professor, forgive me, but your value for the cross-section, is that for fast neutrons or thermal neutrons? Heisenberg freezes. His entire life's work has been on the elegant path. Thermal neutrons, slowed down by a heavy water moderator, the physics of a reactor. He has, in this moment, in front of his peers, used the physics of a reactor to calculate the critical mass of a bomb. No, he whispers, looking at his own writing. The calculation for a bomb would use fast neutrons, of course, but the absorption. But Werner, Hartek cuts in, the Americans, what if they didn't care about elegance? What if they just built a reactor, not as an engine, but as a factory? A factory for what? Gerlach asks. For element 94, Hartek says. The one you told Speer about. Plutonium. Heisenberg's blood runs cold. The two blows land at once. 1. He has just been publicly humiliated by his own basic miscalculation. He, the Nobel laureate, had failed to grasp the fundamental physics of a bomb. 2. The Americans had not only pursued the brute force separation of U-235 he had mocked, they had also pursued the reactor path he had championed, and they had succeeded where he had failed, using it to create an entirely new, even deadlier element. He had told Speer it would take tons. He had told Speer the U-235 path was too crude. He had told his colleagues the Americans were years behind. He turns back to the blackboard. His hand is shaking. He slowly, deliberately, erases the equation. He starts again. This time, he uses the correct values, the values for fast neutron fission. He doesn't speak. The only sound is the frantic click-clack of the chalk. The room watches. This isn't physics. This is a post-mortem. He finishes. He steps back. The number on the board is no longer tons. It is kilograms. 60, he says, his voice hollow. Perhaps 60 kilograms for uranium. For plutonium, much less. Perhaps 10. He lets the chalk fall from his hand. It shatters on the floor. Kurt Diebner, his longtime rival, who had run a parallel, more practical bomb program that Heisenberg had stifled, looks at him with cold pity. So, Professor, Diebner says, unable to resist the final twist of the knife, it seems the Americans knew more about physics than you. Or perhaps, he gestures to the comfortable room, the fine food, the academic debates, we just didn't want to build it badly enough. Heisenberg doesn't answer. He just stares at the number on the board. He had failed, not as a moralist, not as a resistor. He had failed as a physicist. And in his arrogance, he had mocked the very people who had just ended the world. August 8th, 1945, the gardens of Farm Hall. The 2 days since the Hiroshima announcement have been a fog of disbelief and profound, corrosive shame. The 10 scientists are no longer a unified group. They are 10 individuals, isolated in their own private humiliation. Werner Heisenberg walks the gravel paths of the garden, his hands clasped behind his back. The drizzle has stopped, but the air is damp and heavy. He is no longer the frantic man at the blackboard. He is cold, calculating, and desperate. He is not trying to understand the physics. He is trying to build a new narrative. He finds Walther Gerlach, the former head of the project, sitting on a stone bench, staring blankly at a rose bush. Gerlach is a broken man. As the Reich plenipotentiary, he sees this not as a scientific failure, but a national one. "We have failed," he mutters, "to no one. I failed the Reich. I failed the Führer." "We did not fail," Heisenberg says, his voice quiet, insistent. Gerlach looks up, his eyes hollow. "What? Werner, they did it. They dropped an atomic bomb. We were building a small, non-functional reactor in a beer cellar. How is that not failure?" "Because," Heisenberg sits beside him, "we never truly tried." This is the new idea, the seed of a narrative that will grow to define his legacy. "Think back, Walther," Heisenberg says, leaning in, his voice persuasive. "Think to 1942, the meeting with Speer. Did I not tell him the bomb would be enormous? Did I not emphasize the difficulties? Did I not steer him toward the reactor, toward the engine?" "You did," Gerlach concedes, "but your calculations were, as we now know." "My calculations were irrelevant," Heisenberg snaps, then lowers his voice. "The intent. I knew, we all knew, what such a weapon would mean in the hands of them. In Hitler's hands. We were scientists, yes, but we were also civilized men." He is testing the words. They feel good. They feel true. "We had a choice," Heisenberg continues, standing, pacing in front of the bench. "We could have pushed. We could have demanded the factories. We could have, perhaps, solved the fast neutron problem. But we did not." Karl Wirtz joins them, drawn by the conversation. "We did not." Wirtz agrees, catching the new current. "We always focused on the Uran machine, the engine, a power source for Germany after the war. This is the comforting lie, the antidote to their humiliation. They were not incompetent. They were moral. They weren't outsmarted by crude American engineering. They were simply too civilized, too profound, to unleash such a horror. They were secret resistors who, by their own intellectual superiority, quietly sabotaged the Nazi bomb program from within. They hadn't failed to build a bomb. They had succeeded in not building one." This new story spreads through the house like a balm. By the evening, the entire group is gathered again in the drawing room. The mood has changed. The shame is gone, replaced by a quiet, self-congratulatory dignity. "The Americans," one of them says, "they built this terrible thing. They used it. They have this on their conscience. Our hands are clean." "Indeed," says Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, "we were spared the decision. We were spared the moral filth of succeeding." They are all in agreement. They have found their story. The hidden microphones, which they are all certain are listening, are recording this masterful, self-serving revision of history. It is at this precise moment of restored arrogance that the door opens. Major T.H. Rittner, their British custodian, enters the room. He looks grim. He is holding a piece of paper. "Gentlemen," he says, and the room falls silent. "I have just received a dispatch. The 9 o'clock news will confirm it." Heisenberg straightens his tie. "More propaganda, Major, or have they dropped a second atomic bluff?" "This morning," Rittner says, reading, "a second, different model bomb was detonated over the city of Nagasaki." A cold dread silences the room. "A different model." Heisenberg's voice is strained. "Uranium-235? Did they have two?" "The report says this was a device," Rittner continues, his eyes scanning the page, "using the synthetic element 94, the one you call plutonium. It is the single worst piece of information they could have received. It is a checkmate. The Hiroshima bomb proved the Americans had mastered the brute force, industrial separation of U-235, the method Heisenberg had mocked as impossibly crude and expensive. The Nagasaki bomb proves something infinitely worse. It proves the Americans had also mastered the elegant path. They had built a large-scale, functioning nuclear reactor. They had used it to breed plutonium, the very thing Heisenberg had dangled in front of Albert Speer. They had built the reactor the Uranverein had failed even to design correctly, and they had weaponized its product. They hadn't just won the race. They had won both races. Heisenberg's carefully constructed moral defense lies in ashes. There is no moral superiority in failing at everything. He sinks into a chair. The room is silent. The microphones in the walls are capturing the sound of 10 brilliant minds, 10 self-proclaimed masters of the universe, realizing, in one devastating instant, that they were nothing more than a footnote. August 14th, 1945. The Library, Farm Hall. It is over. 6 days after Nagasaki, the Emperor of Japan has broadcast his surrender. The world is finally, brutally, at peace. Inside Farm Hall, the silence is heavier than any prison wall. The shock of the plutonium bomb has settled into a permanent, listless gloom. The scientists no longer debate. They don't play fistball. They sit, they read, they avoid each other's eyes. The new narrative of moral resistance is dead. They are left with only one inescapable truth. They had been irrelevant. This morning, Major Rittner enters the library, where Heisenberg is staring at a page of physics, not reading it. Rittner places a thick, soft-cover book on the table. It is printed on cheap paper, clearly rushed. The title is Atomic Energy for Military Purposes, the official report on the development of the atomic bomb under the auspices of the United States government. 1940-1945. It is the Smith Report. The press has this now, Rittner says, not unkindly. It was thought, you should have a copy. Heisenberg doesn't move. Gerlach, Hahn, and Hartek drift into the room, drawn by the presence of this new artifact. They gather around the table. Heisenberg slowly opens the cover. He begins to read. This is not a news report. This is not propaganda. This is a textbook. It is a 300-page, point-by-point, soul-crushing instruction manual for how they were beaten. Heisenberg reads, and his face goes pale. He sees the name Enrico Fermi. He reads how Fermi built the Chicago Pile 1, a functioning, self-sustaining nuclear reactor, in 1942, the year Heisenberg was telling Speer it was a distant dream. The year the Uranverein was still struggling to get enough heavy water. He reads the chapter on isotope separation. He does not see one crude method. He sees 4. He sees gaseous diffusion at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a plant covering 44 acres, employing 12,000 people, built for the sole purpose of separating U-235. He sees electromagnetic separation, the calutrons, designed by Ernest Lawrence, a man Heisenberg considered a mere technician, a project that consumed more electricity than all of Berlin. He sees thermal diffusion. He sees the centrifuge project. He turns the page. The plutonium path. He reads about the Hanford Engineer Works in Washington State, a site spanning 600 square miles. Not one reactor, but 3 massive, industrial-scale plutonium-breeding reactors, cooled by the entire Columbia River, a site with 50,000 workers. Heisenberg's hands are visibly shaking. This was not physics. This was an industry. This was a civilization-level effort. God in heaven, Hahn whispers, reading over his shoulder. The cost. They spent $2 billion. $2,001,945, the equivalent of the entire German war budget for a full year. This is the final, killing blow. Their mockery of the American method was based on the assumption that no sane, civilized nation would ever commit to such an inelegant, brute force, crude industrial scale. They thought it was a question of physics. The Americans had proven it was a question of will. Heisenberg closes the book. The sound is final. He had thought his small group of elite academics, working in a beer cellar in Haigerloch, was at the center of the physics universe. He now knew they were not even in the same galaxy. The Americans hadn't just built the crude machine he'd mocked. They had built a machine so vast, so powerful, it had consumed the entire scientific and industrial might of a continent. The German scientists were released in January 1946. They returned to a divided, ruined Germany, And they told their story. They told the story of moral resistance, of how they, the civilized scientists, knew the horror of the bomb, and secretly, bravely, steered the Reich away from it. Heisenberg, the Nobel laureate, would claim he had kept the secret of the bomb's feasibility from Hitler. They told this story to reporters. They wrote it in their memoirs. They told it so often and so well that it became the history. They did not know, for 50 years, that Major Rittner's microphones had been listening, that every word of their private, immediate, ugly humiliation had been recorded. The transcripts from Farm Hall's eavesdropper's report would not be declassified until 1992. And there, preserved in amber, was the truth. Not a story of moral choice, but a story of profound, cosmic arrogance. The story of Werner Heisenberg, standing at a blackboard, angry, insulted, and utterly, totally wrong.